Intro music with title card. My parents pierced my baby's ears without permission, so I made them. Alright, let's dive into a story that really blew up on Reddit, and honestly, it's one of those situations where you read the title and just have to know more. The post was titled, "Am I the asshole for telling my mom and dad that they have to get their noses pierced if they want to see my daughter again?" Yeah, you heard that right. Nose piercings, as a condition for seeing their grandchild. It sounds absolutely wild, maybe even petty, but when you hear the backstory, you start to understand the level of frustration and betrayal that led to such an extreme ultimatum. This isn't just about jewelry. It's about boundaries, respect, cultural clashes, and a fundamental violation of parental rights. Imagine going to visit your family, trusting them with your precious one-year-old baby, only to come back and find they've made a permanent alteration to her body without even asking you. The rage, unimaginable. So let's unpack this whole situation piece by piece and see how a birthday gift turned into a full-blown family war. Our storyteller, let's call her Olivia, is an American citizen. Her parents, however, are not, and they live down in Mexico. Olivia and her husband decided to make the trip south to visit her family, bringing along their daughter who was celebrating her very first birthday. A big milestone, right? A time for family celebration, maybe some cake, and definitely presents. And presents there were. Olivia's mom and dad were excited to give their granddaughter a special birthday gift, a pair of earrings. A sweet gesture, perhaps, but there was one small catch: Olivia's daughter didn't have pierced ears. She was only 1 year old, and Olivia and her husband hadn't made the decision to pierce them yet. Now, Olivia handled this pretty diplomatically at first. She thanked her parents for the thoughtful gift, these little earrings meant for her baby girl. But she explained clearly and politely that her daughter's ears weren't pierced. She told them, "Thank you so much, these are lovely. I'll save them for her until she's old enough to decide if she wants her ears pierced, and we can take her then." Seems reasonable, right? She acknowledged the gift, expressed gratitude, but set a boundary based on her parenting choices. She wasn't rejecting the gift itself, just the immediate implication that the baby should have pierced ears right now. She planned to keep them safe, a future present for when the time was right according to her and her husband's timeline, and importantly, maybe even their daughter's own choice down the line. At this point, it seems like a minor difference in opinion, maybe a slight cultural misunderstanding, but nothing that couldn't be smoothed over. They were visiting family, celebrating a birthday, things seemed okay. Olivia probably thought that was the end of it. The earrings would go into a jewelry box saved for later and the visit would continue. Oh, how wrong she was. The visit continued, and Olivia and her husband had plans to meet up with some friends while they were in town. They needed someone to watch their daughter for a bit. Who better, they thought, than Grandma and Grandpa? They were family after all. They loved their granddaughter. Surely they could be trusted to look after the baby for a few hours while Olivia and her husband stepped out. They dropped their daughter off, probably gave the usual instructions about naps and snacks, and headed off to meet their friends, likely feeling relaxed and confident that their child was in safe, loving hands. They enjoyed their time out, caught up with friends, and then headed back to her parents' place to pick up their little girl. They walked in, expecting maybe a sleepy baby or one playing happily with her grandparents. What they got instead was a bombshell dropped with a casual, almost proud smile. Olivia's mom greeted them beaming, and then she showed them. "Look," she might have said, gesturing towards the baby, "you don't need to wait to use the earrings. We took her to get her ears pierced while you were out, just like that. No discussion, no asking, just done." Imagine the scene. Olivia looks at her 1-year-old daughter, and there they are, tiny new studs glittering in her earlobes, lobes that were unpierced just hours before. The shock must have been instantaneous, a physical jolt, followed immediately by a white-hot wave of fury. Her baby, her decision completely ignored, violated. Her parents had taken her child without permission and subjected her to a procedure, a body modification, however minor some might see it, that Olivia and her husband explicitly said they were waiting on. Olivia described her reaction as pure fury. Her husband, he was apparently on the verge of completely losing his temper, ready to explode. Olivia knew she had to get them out of there immediately before things escalated into a massive confrontation they might regret. She grabbed her daughter, probably checked her ears with a racing heart, and practically dragged her husband out of the house. No big dramatic scene, not yet anyway. Just shock, anger, and the immediate need to escape that environment. They fled back to the safety and privacy of their hotel room, the reality of what just happened crashing down on them. Their trust, shattered, the rest of the visit, absolutely over. Back in the sterile quiet of their hotel room, the full weight of the betrayal settled in. Olivia was furious, a deep, simmering rage that went beyond just the piercing itself. It was the blatant disregard for their authority as parents, the complete lack of respect for their choices regarding their own child. Her husband was equally livid. He immediately laid down the law. Olivia's parents were never, ever going to be allowed to spend time alone with their daughter again. Full stop. No unsupervised visits, period. The trust required for that was gone, possibly forever. But Olivia felt it needed to go further than just supervised visits. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a fundamental breach of trust that happened in their home country under their watch. She declared that she wouldn't be bringing their daughter or any future children they might have, back down to Mexico to visit her parents. If her parents couldn't respect their boundaries on something like this, how could they be trusted with anything else? The decision was made. The visit was over. They had planned to stay for 3 more days, soak up a bit more family time, maybe enjoy the local culture. Instead, they packed their bags, checked out of the hotel early, and started the long drive back home to Phoenix. The drive itself must have been incredibly tense, filled with a mixture of anger, hurt, and disbelief. And all the while, Olivia's phone was blowing up. Her parents were calling, texting, wanting to know when they were coming over, completely oblivious, it seemed, to the magnitude of what they had done or the fury they had unleashed. Or perhaps they knew and were trying to pretend it was no big deal. Olivia ignored every single call, every single text. She couldn't talk to them yet. She and her husband needed space, time to process, time to cool down from the initial explosion of anger before they could even attempt to articulate how badly their parents had messed up. They drove in silence or maybe talked through their anger, reinforcing their decision. They needed the physical distance, the safety of their own home turf in Phoenix before confronting this head-on. Once they were back home in Phoenix, safely away from the immediate situation, Olivia and her husband took a couple of days. They needed to let the initial wave of rage subside, to think clearly about what had happened and how they wanted to proceed. This wasn't just a minor disagreement. It felt like a fundamental betrayal by the people who were supposed to love and support them. They needed to be strategic, united, and firm in their response. The silence was probably heavy during those days, punctuated by discussions about boundaries, consequences, and the future of their relationship with Olivia's parents. They had to decide, was this fixable, and if so, what would it take? Finally, after those few days of cooling off and strategizing, Olivia felt ready to make the call. She dialed her parents' number, bracing herself. When they answered, the first thing she did was set a crucial ground rule. Please don't speak until I'm finished talking. She needed to get everything out, uninterrupted, without justifications or excuses derailing her message. She then laid it all out, calmly but firmly. She told them point blank that she and her husband were incredibly upset, hurt, and angry that they had taken their baby to get her ears pierced without permission. She explained that this action was a major violation of their trust and their rights as parents. She informed them that they had cut the trip short, returned home to Phoenix, and that they probably wouldn't be visiting again for a very long time, if ever. She needed them to understand the severity of their actions and the consequences that would follow. She wasn't yelling, she wasn't hysterical, but the message was clear. You crossed a line and things are going to change because of it. How did her parents react once she finally let them speak? Did they apologize, show remorse, understand the gravity of their actions? Nope, not even close. Their response was pure justification and deflection. They immediately fell back on the classic line. But we did it to you and your sister when you were babies, and it didn't harm you. They minimized Olivia's feelings, basically saying she was overreacting because it was something they considered normal and harmless based on their own past experiences and cultural background. And this is where the Reddit comments really add some crucial context. Many commenters, particularly those familiar with Mexican culture, pointed out that piercing a baby girl's ears is incredibly common, sometimes even done at the hospital shortly after birth. It's often seen as a standard practice, not controversial at all. Some suggested the grandparents might have genuinely thought they were doing Olivia a favor, getting something out of the way that they assumed she'd want done eventually anyway. Others mentioned similar traditions in Puerto Rican, Indian, and other cultures. It wasn't necessarily malicious in their eyes, perhaps just normal. A generational thing even. Older generations sometimes feel they have certain rights or insights when it comes to grandchildren, believing their way is the right way because that's how it's always been done. But here's the critical point Olivia and many commenters emphasized. Cultural norms or generational habits do not supersede the explicit wishes of the parents. Olivia had already told them she was waiting. Her no not yet was clear. Whether they thought it was harmless or traditional was irrelevant. They ignored a direct boundary set by their child about her child. Olivia stood firm on the call. She told them their justifications didn't change anything. We are not going to change our minds about being upset or about not visiting for a while, she reiterated. This wasn't up for debate. But instead of accepting this, her parents doubled down. They didn't like being told no or facing consequences. So what did they do? They started mobilizing the troops. They got everyone involved, aunts, uncles, cousins, even Olivia's grandmother. Suddenly, Olivia's phone was ringing off the hook again, but this time it was extended family members calling to tell her she was being ridiculous, overly sensitive, cruel, and that she was denying her parents their right to see their grandchild. It became a full-on family pressure campaign, designed to guilt and shame Olivia into backing down and letting her parents off the hook. They were trying to paint her as the villain for enforcing a boundary they had blatantly ignored. Faced with this onslaught of family pressure and her parents' complete refusal to acknowledge they'd done anything wrong, Olivia felt backed into a corner. The calls were relentless, accusing her of being unreasonable, of tearing the family apart. It was classic manipulation, turning the situation around to make the person who was wronged feel like the one causing the problem. Olivia and her husband talked it over again. They were hurt, angry, and now under siege from the extended family. They still felt the original boundary violation was huge, but maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward if the parents could somehow demonstrate they understood the concept of bodily autonomy and respecting choices they didn't agree with. They didn't want to cut off family completely if there was any hope of reconciliation based on mutual respect. So they came up with a creative compromise, or perhaps more accurately a test, a way to make the parents experience, even symbolically, what it felt like to have someone demand they undergo a body modification they didn't want. Olivia called her parents back. She told them they had discussed it, and they might be willing to resume visits, supervised visits only, no more alone time, under one condition. Both her mom and her dad had to get their noses pierced. Let that sink in, nose piercings, for both of them, as the price of admission back into their granddaughter's life, at least for supervised visits. Now, how did they expect her parents to react? The Reddit comments had theories. Some thought Olivia and her husband knew full well the parents would absolutely refuse, making the ultimatum a clever, albeit dramatic, way to enforce the no-contact boundary they already felt was necessary. It was a no disguised as a conditional yes. Others saw it as a powerful, if unconventional, way to make a point. To illustrate, you think it's no big deal to permanently alter someone's body without their consent. How would you like it if we demanded you do something similar? It forces the parents to confront the feeling of having their own bodily autonomy disregarded, mirroring what they did to the baby. However, some commenters felt the nose-piercing condition was just plain ridiculous and counterproductive. They argued it distracted from the real issue, the lack of respect and boundary crossing, and made Olivia and her husband look petty or immature, potentially undermining their valid position in the eyes of the wider family. Was it the perfect strategy? Maybe not. Was it designed to get a specific reaction? Almost certainly. Predictably, Olivia's parents were outraged by the condition. "You are being stupid," they retorted. "We are not going to do that." They were indignant, offended that their children would demand such a thing. The irony, of course, seemed completely lost on them. They saw piercing their granddaughter's ears without consent as perfectly fine, a cultural norm, maybe even a loving gesture. But the idea of getting their own noses pierced as a consequence, utterly absurd and unacceptable. Olivia's response to their refusal was calm, collected, and devastatingly simple. "No problem," she said, and then she hung up the phone. No further argument, no pleading, no negotiation. They refused the condition, and she accepted their refusal along with the consequence that came with it. No visits. By refusing the nose piercings, they essentially confirmed they still didn't grasp the core issue of consent and bodily autonomy, or they simply weren't willing to do anything uncomfortable to mend the relationship. Olivia and her husband had offered a path back, however strange, and her parents slammed that door shut. So Olivia accepted it. The compromise had served its purpose, whether that was to make a point or simply to confirm that reconciliation on Olivia's terms wasn't possible. The fallout from this final exchange was immediate and intense. The refusal of the nose-piercing ultimatum, followed by Olivia hanging up, signaled the end of negotiations. The lines were drawn. Olivia and her husband were standing firm on the consequence. No piercings, no visits. This, predictably, did not go over well with the extended family, who were likely still being fed a narrative by the parents about Olivia being unreasonable and cruel. The calls and texts probably ramped up again, filled with accusations and guilt trips. How could she deny her parents their right to see their grandchild? Family is family. She was tearing the family apart over something so small. The pressure was immense, coming from people she grew up with, people she loved. But Olivia and her husband had reached their limit. They were done justifying their position. They were done arguing. They were done being made to feel like the bad guys for protecting their child and demanding basic respect. So they started blocking numbers. Anyone who called or texted to give them grief, to pressure them, to tell them they were wrong, blocked. Aunts, uncles, cousins, maybe even grandma. It sounds harsh cutting off family like that, but they saw it as a necessary act of self-preservation. They needed to create a boundary not just with the parents, but with anyone who was enabling the parents' behavior or refusing to respect their decision as the child's parents. They presented a united front, protecting their little family unit from the external onslaught. This wasn't just about pierced ears anymore. It was a full-blown family war, and Olivia and her husband were digging in their heels, refusing to surrender their parental authority or their peace of mind. The silence from the blocked numbers must have been a relief, even if it came at the cost of wider family relationships. They had chosen their daughter, their marriage, and their boundaries over maintaining harmony with people who wouldn't respect them. So where does this leave Olivia, her husband, and their daughter? Estranged from her parents and a significant portion of her extended family, all because of a pair of earrings and a profound lack of respect. Looking back, it's easy to get caught up in the drama of the nose-piercing ultimatum, but the core of this conflict runs much deeper. It's about consent. It's about bodily autonomy. It's about parents having the fundamental right to make decisions about their own children without interference, even from well-meaning or perhaps not so well-meaning grandparents. Many Reddit commenters highlighted the importance of bodily autonomy, the right for individuals to control their own bodies. While a 1-year-old can't consent, the parents act as her protectors, making decisions in her best interest until she is old enough to make them herself. Piercing her ears wasn't just about aesthetics, it was a permanent modification done without the consent of her guardians. Some commenters even argued it could technically be considered assault in a legal sense, though that might be taking it to an extreme. The point remains, it wasn't the grandparents' decision to make. Then there are the practical concerns raised in the comments. Where did the grandparents take the baby for this piercing? Was it a reputable piercing studio using sterile needles, or was it some mall kiosk with a piercing gun? Many commenters warned vehemently against piercing guns, especially for babies. They explained how guns use blunt force trauma to shove the earring through the lobe, which can damage tissue, increase infection risk, and make healing more difficult. Guns are also notoriously hard to sterilize properly. Professional piercers using sterile single-use needles create a clean channel for the jewelry, leading to safer and better healing. Did the grandparents even consider this? Did they ensure proper aftercare instructions were followed? Given their casual attitude, it seems unlikely. Commenters shared horror stories of infections, misplaced piercings that looked uneven as the child grew, and even cases where infected earrings became embedded in the earlobe, requiring surgical removal. One commenter, a medical professional, shared exactly such a story. There were also accounts from adults whose baby piercings left noticeable scars or bumps even after they closed up. These aren't just harmless decorations, there are real risks involved, especially for a baby with a developing immune system. Olivia's parents, in their haste to enforce their own cultural preference, potentially exposed their granddaughter to these risks without a second thought. And while the cultural context is important for understanding the grandparents' potential mindset, that they might not have seen it as a big deal, it doesn't excuse their actions. Olivia lives in the US, raising her daughter within her own family unit with her husband. They get to decide which cultural traditions they adopt and which they don't. Her parents needed to respect her family's choices, not impose their own. As many commenters pointed out, effective communication about these differences in values and expectations before such incidents occur is key, but in this case, the grandparents bypassed communication entirely. Ultimately, Olivia and her husband made a stand. They drew a line in the sand about respect and boundaries. The nose-piercing ultimatum, whether a strategic move or a moment of frustration, served to highlight the parents' unwillingness to acknowledge their wrongdoing in a tangible way. By refusing, they cemented the consequences. The decision to go low or no contact and block enabling family members was a painful but necessary step to protect their child and their own mental health. This story serves as a stark reminder. Grandparents don't have rights to their grandchildren that supersede the parents' rights and responsibilities. Relationships require mutual respect, and respecting boundaries is non-negotiable, especially when it comes to a child's well-being and bodily integrity. Olivia didn't just react to pierced ears, she reacted to a fundamental violation of trust and authority. And in the end, she chose to protect her daughter, even if it meant sacrificing relationships with those who refused to honor that protection. It's a tough situation with no easy answers, but Olivia and her husband decided where their priorities lie, with their child, their family unit, and the boundaries they set together. Outro music fades in.